He says, for I received from the Master that which I also delivered to you, that the Master Yeshua, in the night in which he was delivered up, it doesn't again call it Passover, in the night in which he was delivered up, took bread, and having given thanks, he broke it and said, take, eat, this is my body, which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way also the cup, after supper, saying, this cup is the renewed covenant in my blood. As often as you drink it, do this in remembrance of me. So, now, this is slightly worded differently than you find in the Gospels, where it talks about as often as you do. Because he's also referring to the fact that this is your Kiddush and Motzi. This is the this is the bread and the wine that the Jewish community had been doing for a long time prior to this being written, before Yeshua put on the flesh suit. And they were doing it here. Yeshua utilized it as a teaching tool. The Jewish community still does this today, so do we. It is not communion. The Catholic Church invented that nonsense. Okay? He was using the metaphors as a teaching tool, saying to do this in remembrance of me. As often as you come together as an assembly and you break bread and you drink the wine, which you see all the way back to Abraham and Melchizedek, it's a fellowship, relationship, meal type of thing, a little ceremony. He says, do it in remembrance of me. Because why? Because he says, the bread is my body broken for you. And they would break the bread, they would tear it. He says, because we also know that what? Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word. We also know that he is the bread of life. All these metaphors point to Yeshua and the bread. We also have the metaphors about the wine being blood, because we're also told that life is in the blood. And so what he's saying is when you drink of me and you eat of me, you've got the word of Yahweh and you've got life. He's not saying it's going to go and do that trance whatever thing and turn literally into his body and his blood. That is sick. That is just, that would scare me as a little kid. Go up there and put that cracker in your mouth. It's going to turn into the body of a Messiah. That would be crazy. Okay, not kosher at all. Okay? And so, but he's saying, look, when you come together, recognize that you're doing this and you're thinking of him. Why are you acting drunk? Why are you not making sure that people are fed? Why are you just caring about yourself? Because everything is in the context of community. Everything's in the context of the group or the assembly, the body. He says, but when you come together, you guys have division. You only care about yourselves. You make sure your own needs are taken care of. You're not watching out for other people. And then even when you're taking care of your own needs, you're being gluttonous and drunk because all you want to do is indulge yourself. He said, and that's not the way it was delivered to me. He says, Messiah said to me that when you have the bread and the wine, you should be recognizing the covenant. Because he says, this cup is the renewed covenant in my blood. In other words, it represents the renewal of covenant process that Jeremiah is talking about, where we're going to come together as one. Because the covenant renewal that goes back to Jeremiah 31, which we read, in one of the previous parts, talks about no longer would there be two houses. No longer would there be any of those things separate, but there would be one, a renewing of covenant with the house of Israel, in which they would be his people and he would be their Elohim. No division, no authority questions, no issues, because it would be full submission to Elohim. But yet here, you can see by the time we get to this whole thing, you could easily just focus on the verses beginning in verse 20, when you come together to the place to eat the Master's Supper, and have no idea the context of that section. The context has to do with all of this, eating and drinking appropriately. Are you eating and drinking of Messiah, or are you eating and drinking of the flesh? Because if you're behaving the way he describes in 21 and 22, then you're not eating of Messiah. You're just drinking wine and eating bread. He says, do this in remembrance of me. It also has to do with the esteem that's talked about in verse 7. Okay, where are you giving esteem or are you seeking esteem for yourself? we should be remembering him and giving him all the glory and honor. He says, for as often as you eat of this bread and drink of this cup, you proclaim the death of the master until he comes. So he says you are reminding yourself of the death, burial, and resurrection. You're reminding yourself of your need for what he did.